Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the fifth part of What If Deku Became a Vigilante. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 13, Moving Shadows. And that's for my gummy worms. Izuku smacked Kiken on the head again. The explosive blonde clutched his head but didn't say anything, probably because of Eri sitting right next to him. And because Izuku's made it quite clear that he won't escape an ass-kicking if he swears around Eri. Kaminari whistled from his chair next to Ashido's bed. Remind me not to get on Midoriya's bad side. Ashido nodded in agreement. Him and Kaminari were still in the school's infirmary, waiting for Ashido and Kiken to wake up from their healing with Recovery Girl. Eri was there too, as she really wanted to make sure Kiken and I was okay, while Kaminari reasoned that resident idiots gotta stick together. Izuku got through polishing up Todoroki's, Itsu's, and Aoyama's analyses before Ashido woke up, and only a few minutes later Kiken woke up. Which was when he started yelling at Kiken. Ow. Okay, I get it. Kiken growled after a few more smacks. Recovery Girl had given them the all clear, so Izuku was in the all clear to smack him as many times as it takes for the message to get through. Eri tugged on Izuku's sleeve. Izunaya-kan, I wanna go to Auntie Mitsuki's. Izuku sighed, grabbing Kiken by the arm and dragging him out of the infirmary. Come on, let's get back home. I only told Auntie that you got hurt, so it's up to you to answer her. Kiken paled, but let himself be pulled along. You left me at the hag's mercy. Karma, Kiken, karma. What does that mean? Izuku had just tucked Eri into bed, giving her a kiss on the forehead and tucking her stuffed puppy in with her. He slipped into his office, closing the door with a soft click, before changing quickly and slipping out the window. He breathed in the cool night air, letting the mask slip on. Kitsune flicked his wrist, his grappling hook taking him up into the air and launching him into the air. One for all still took some getting used to. He didn't use it on patrol, because he didn't want anything linking his vigilante persona with his civilian one, but his other quirks were more powerful. And all for one, it settled, it stopped constantly screeching in his ear to take quirks. Almost like it was satisfied. Kitsune did not like the implications of that. He pushed his personal problems to the back of his mind as he started his patrol, keeping his ears open as he ran over the rooftops of the red light district. The familiar buzz of Shirionai's chatter in his ear, the sounds and chatter of the city, the lights of people's quirks. This is what he lived for. Right next to the adrenaline that he feels in every fight. Doesn't make getting shot any more fun though. Codeword League of Villains detected in a conversation in an alleyway. Location marked on street map. Ice-cold dread shivered down his spine. Thanks Shiryoni, he muttered, switching directions to the dead zone. The dead zone was a special area in the red light district that was completely abandoned. All the buildings were in ruins, and even the homeless didn't dare to set foot there. It was the hunting ground of a few different serial killers, and it was so deserted that the police have just abandoned it with warnings to stay away. Dead bodies were left to rot in the street. Criminals dared to enter in order to arrange meetings because nobody except the known serial killers lived there, but most of them died grisly deaths. A long time ago, Kitsune stayed a few months in one of the apartments, but after a particularly nasty near-death experience, he decided to pack it up and leave. Kitsune normally avoids the dead zone. No civilians go in there anymore, and the criminals who go in are either pretty strong or pretty stupid, so he decided a long time ago that the risk was not worth trying to patrol it. Unfortunately, the information about the League was too important to not go in. He ducked down on the edge of a building, poised to make a quick escape if necessary. Across from him was a deathly familiar figure, perched like a raptor about to strike. The glint of metal caught his eye, and Kitsune started to panic. Wait, he signed. The figure tilted his head. Why? Need information. They're years after. After a pause, the figure nodded. Kitsune let out a breath of relief, then focused back into the conversation. Dude, you serious? One of the thugs said. That's it? Guys, I know it's crazy, but I think they're legit. Another thug responded. Just imagine if we were a part of the group to kill All Might. Did they at least promise pay? The third thug asked, earning a dirty look from the first thug. Yeah, a massive one. 1 billion yen. Whoa, we'd be set for life. The third thug responded. The first thug sighed. Did they at least give a location? Yeah. You know that one warehouse in the docks. The docks have only warehouses. Where that one madman lived who hoarded a fuck ton of sternapro only to set it on fire. Oh, that warehouse. Anyways, that's where the meeting for the showdown. They don't have a date yet, but they'll let us know when it's gonna go down. Well, I'm out, the smart thug said. That's just a recipe for disaster. But the money dash. Kitsune zoned out. That's all the information he needed. He nodded to the figure across from him, then stood up, running across the rooftops out of the dead zone to the charming screams of the thugs as they died behind him. He pretended that their deaths didn't weigh on his shoulders. They were 3 more new names on the list of people he's failed. Hey! Eraserhead! Kitsune shouted, running across the rooftops to catch up to the underground hero. The man turned around, raising an eyebrow at the sight of the vigilante. Hellion, the long-suffering hero responded. We need to talk. Eraserhead stood up straighter, looking more serious. About what? Kitsune shook his head. We need to speak somewhere private. He spun on his heel, starting to run off. Eraserhead swore behind him, following the vigilante as they raced across Musudafu. He dropped off of a smaller building, slipping into one of the abandoned subway tunnels. Japan had long since abandoned the underground subway, instead making new ones above ground that were more suited for mutation quirks. The underground tunnels were now the stomping grounds of those who knew them, especially of Kitsune himself. He didn't go too far into the tunnels, just enough to avoid the security cameras. Eraserhead slipped in after him, leaning on the tunnel wall across from him. Alright, what's this about? The hero asked, crossing his arms. The League of Villains. The what? Kitsune sighed. Sorry, I've been keeping so close of an eye on them that I forgot it's pretty unknown. The League of Villains is a group that's been around for a very long time, but it's making moves recently. That explains some of the talk of the underground, Eraserhead said. But why? Their goal is to kill All Might. To kill All Might? That should be impossible. Should be. Kitsune crossed his arms in a pseudo-hug. And yet you can temporarily disable quirks despite quirk factors being encoded in DNA. There are multiple shape-shifting quirks and quirks that seem to bend physical reality. Don't rule them out. Do you have a time or location? Eraserhead asked. Kitsune shook his head. A location but not a time. It looks like they don't either though. I can send you the exact location that they're meeting at. Just be careful. I know All Might teaches at UA now. I wouldn't put it past them to try and attack the school. How you know what? I'm not even going to question that, the hero sighed. It's UA, the safest place on the planet. And they expect to kill All Might, the greatest hero in the world, the vigilante pointed out. Just keep an eye out. Be safe. You stay safe too, problem child, Eraserhead said. Kitsune chuckled as he turned around, facing the tunnel entrance. You know I can't promise that. Wait. The call from the hero made him turn around, and he caught the jelly pouch thrown at him. I know you have a habit of skipping meals. He gripped the jelly pouch. Now that he looked at it closer, it was a 3-pack of jelly pouches. Lovely. How do I know you didn't lace them? They're still sealed, Eraserhead deadpanned. Also I'm pretty sure I can't lace anything in there that would actually affect you. Okay, I'm not that bad. I watched you pick up a hot dog off the ground and lift up your mask to eat it. Touché. Kitsune turned around again, giving off a finger gun salute as he left. Well, see ya around, Eraserhead. The man simply grunted behind him, and Kitsune shot off a grappling hook, flinging himself into the city once again. If he paused during his patrol for 15 minutes to slurp up the jelly pouches, that was his own business. It looked like it was gonna be another all-nighter. Izuku had just gotten back to the apartment and stripped himself of his vigilante gear, tucking it into the safe under his desk. He's readjusted his office to more easily hide things from snooping Kikens, not that he ever comes over, but it pays to be safe, with everything important going into the safe. Everything important includes all the legal papers that don't get set on fire, Izuku's vigilante gear, all the rainy day money, and the quirk suppressing bullets. The safe was modified by him, so it's now protected by both a fingerprint scanner and a physical 6-number password. Plus it has a handle on top. He's just put on the old gym shorts and tee that serves as his pajamas when he hears soft keening whines coming from their bedroom. On high alert already because of his nerves, Izuku shuffled across the hall, peeking into the bedroom. Eri was still asleep, but her brow was furrowed, and she tossed and turned in bed while she whined. Usa-chan was on the floor next to the bed. Izuku walked in, sitting down on the bed next to her. Unfortunately, nightmares aren't uncommon for either of them, but it means that Izuku knows what to do. He started humming a tune from his childhood, gently grasping Eri's wrist while she flailed. He tugged on the soft light of Eri's quirk, feeling rewind settle in his chest. Once the quirk was settled, he scooted over on the bed, gently shaking Eri awake. She gasped awake, shaking like a leaf in the wind, and Izuku tucked her into his chest, gently rocking them while he whispered meaningless platitudes, more to fill the space than anything else. He was rubbing circles into her back, in a breathing pattern to bring her down from her panic attack. "It's okay, breathe in and out with me, sunshine, it's just a nightmare. Breathe in, and out, and in, and out, that's very good, Eri bunny. In, and out, and in, and out. Good, you're doing so well, little sunshine." They stayed entangled for a few more minutes, with Eri tucked into his chest, and Izuku cradling her gently, until Eri was calmer, gasping breaths turned to shuddered shaking. "You okay, Eri bunny?" he asked, gently stroking her hair. When he got a nod from her, he then asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" Eri shook her head. "No thank you, Izunaya-kan." "That's okay," Izuku hummed. "Do you want to move to the couch and watch something?" Eri nodded, so Izuku stood up, wading over to the living room. The sofa, TV stand, and TV itself were all dragged from Dagaba Beach and fixed up. They don't have a cable box or anything like that, so Izuku uses his laptop. Izuku set Eri down onto the couch, going back to grab a few blankets and Usa-chan. Once she was properly tucked in, he went back for his laptop, hooking it up to the TV and opening Netflix. "What do you want to watch, Eri bunny?" She gnawed on the bottom of her lip, scanning the list of shows and movies. "The dog documentary, please." He smiled, putting on the documentary about golden retrievers becoming service dogs for the blind. It was one of her favorites. He grabbed his Kitsune notebook and started writing down information, also sending off a text of the meeting's location to Eraserhead. He stayed awake with the help of coffee and his nerves, even as Eri's breathing evened out and she slumped against his side. And soon, it was time to gently wake up Eri and get her some breakfast, because it was time to go to their third day of UA. Chapter 14, Cockroaches with Cameras. "Oh, for fuck's sake." Izuku didn't even correct Kaken, holding Eri's hand. Eureka stood next to them. In front of them were a mass of reporters in front of UA's gates. "We're not going in there," Izuku said, gently pulling his sister to the side. "Eureka, you can use your quirk on yourself, right?" "Yeah, but I get super nauseous if I do so," she responded. "You willing to get nauseous to float everyone over the wall?" Yeah. Great, everyone hold hands." They all locked hands, Kaken taking the edge because he was going to use his quirk to push them over the wall. Eureka touched everyone's hands and they lifted off, her free hand clutched over her mouth. Kaken used some smaller explosions to get them over the wall, and Izuku held on tight to Eri as they dropped down onto the grass. Izawa-sensei, he taught the Gen Ed hero ethics, was walking over to them, but Izuku was more focused on pulling out the first aid kit from his backpack. He offered a couple of tablets to Eureka. "Chew them, they'll make you feel better," Izuku said. "Chew them?" Eureka asked, even as she took the tablets from his hand. Izuku showed her the box. "Why do you have the kids' chewables version of Dramamine?" Izuku just gestured to Eri. "Hellions," Izawa-sensei said, as Izuku finished packing up his backpack and putting it back on his back. "Get to class. I would give you detention for quirk usage outside of class, but I'm too busy fishing out your classmates from the vultures." "The cockroaches with cameras seem like a safety issue," Izuku said, holding Eri's hand again. The pro hero snorted. "There's not much we can do about them. Get to class." "Yes, sensei." "TCH of course, Izawa-sensei." "Midoriya, you should refrain from putting that much espresso in one cup." Aiza arm chopped behind him, Shinsu standing next to him with an expression of awe and shock on his face. Izuku was standing in front of the espresso machine, filling a very large thermos entirely with espresso shots. He's pretty sure he's on 19 shots. It's UA, they can afford it, Izuku muttered, topping off his thermos at 23 shots. I'm more worried for your health, Midoriya, Itza said loudly. This is about my normal cup of coffee, Izuku shrugged, making his way back to a table. How the fuck are you still alive? Shinsu asked. Spite. We're learning about the different kind of heroics. Eureka said excitedly, interrupting the conversation at hand. Today we're going to be learning about underground heroics, tomorrow investigative heroics, the day after that limelight heroics, and at the end of the week we're going on a field trip for rescue heroics. Izuku was sitting at the same table for lunch. Hatsum had pulled herself out of the lab today, and was sitting at the end of the table. She had to drag a chair over, and was fiddling with some sort of machine. Itza and Eureka were across from him, Shinsu to his left and Kiken and his table to his right. Eri was balanced on his knee. That sounds fun. Izuku sighed. We're still doing icebreakers. Have you picked class reps yet? Eureka asked. No, we're still doing icebreakers, Shinsu deadpanned. You did? Izuku asked. Yes. Itza started arm chopping. I was elected president, and Yayorozu was elected vice president. I don't know who that is, Shinsu deadpanned at the same time Izuku nodded. Oh, speaking of which. Eureka said. Mito, did you finish that assignment for Nedzu? I did. Izuku said between bites. I turned it in already. You guys should get them Friday. Them? The table asked. Even Hatsum looked intrigued. Yeah. I couldn't tell you then, but the reason I was spying on your pre-test in the first place was to write everyone individual analyses about your strengths, weaknesses, ways to creatively flex your quirk, your fighting style, ideal support gear, personality, teamwork matchups, and costume modifications. The table was silent. You went to spy on the hero course? Shinsu asked. He fell out of the vents. Eureka said. Eri perked up. Izunaiken crawls through the vents all the time. Sometimes he'll say hi to me between periods. But he usually uses the vents at home to get groceries up without using the stairs. Just use the elevator. Shinsu said in absolute confusion. It's always broken, Izuku said. People have been complaining about it for years. The landlord will never do anything about it, so it's stairs or vents. Izunaiken says these vents are nice. This is so bizarre, yet I am not surprised in the slightest, Shinsu muttered. Broccoli-kun, do you still have the analyses? Hatsum asked. When Izuku nodded, her eyes lit up. Bring them to me. Izuku grinned. The table collectively shuddered. Nedzu cackled from his office. As the conversation drifted, Izuku closed his eyes, expanding his awareness with his quirk. He could feel rewind, zero gravity, brainwashing, engine, and explosion right near him. He expanded outward, feeling the lights of quirks in the cafeteria, then in the building, then around the building. Pain, blood, sharp, void, corrupted, slimy. Izuku stood up abruptly, panic taking over. He dropped Eri down in his seat, grabbing his backpack and swinging it onto his back. Eri, stay with Kiken. He vaulted over the table, ignoring the shouting of his sister and his friends as he sprinted across the cafeteria, slipping into the vents. An alarm started blaring in the school, and Izuku willed himself to focus, pulling the ceramic knife out of its holster in his right arm. Kitsune not Izuku focused his quirk. He could see the quirks of the press surging onto the campus, and the quirks of Kurojiri and Shigaraki teleporting from outside the gate to the teacher's lounge. He pulled on Crow, flying through the vents to the teacher's lounge, then letting go of the quirk. He pulled out his phone, recording the whole time he spied on the two villains. Shigaraki was huddled over All Might's desk, sifting through papers, while Kurojiri stood just behind him. No, aha. Shigaraki pulled one to the front, scanning the paper. Let's see. Saturday is a field trip to a compound away from the main building. Perfect. We've got what we need. Kitsune held his breath as Shigaraki left UA through one of Kurojiri's portals. He let it out as he stopped the recording on his phone, then slipped out of the vents and into the teacher's lounge proper. Kitsune clutched his phone in his right hand, the knife still in his left, and he took off. There was only one hero on his mind, the only one who listened to him and respected his boundaries. He skidded through the halls, one for all powering his limbs in his panic as he raced along to his panicked heart. He locked onto the dark red light of erasure. The police were herding the press off of the campus, and Kitsune skidded to a stop in front of Eraserhead, dimly aware of present Mike standing next to the hero. Eraserhead. Midoriya, what the why do you have a knife? Present Mike asked, but Kitsune only focused on Eraserhead. Kid, breathe. Kitsune was vaguely aware of the panic cloying in his throat, but he shoved it aside. Eraser, he wheezed, and once the words were out past the lump in his throat, Kitsune couldn't stop the tirade that came from his mouth. The press break-in was a cover-up for an actual break-in. There were two villains in the teacher's lounge. They were looking at papers on All Might's desk, they were looking for his teaching schedule and they found it. I think they're going to dash. Midoriya, breathe. He was snapped out of his reverie when he felt two hands with fingerless gloves grasp his wrists, bringing his hands down in front of him. He didn't even realize he was gesturing with his unsheathed knife and phone as he spoke. Kitsune recognized the breathing pattern being tapped on the inside of his wrists. He pried his hands free, quickly unlocking his phone and shoving the recording to Eraserhead. Watch it, please. Eraserhead grabbed the phone out of his hand. Kitsune's hands were still trembling, the knife still in his hands. Present Mike grabbed his left wrist, twisting it a little so that the knife fell from his hands to the grass, and Kitsune was so busy cursing himself internally for dropping the knife, need to be armed to fight off the danger, it's still dangerous, don't they understand the danger, that he didn't notice it when Present Mike pulled him into a hug. Kitsune's brain shut down at the hug. Someone was hugging him, and it was warm and smelled like hairspray and citrus. It took a few minutes for his brain to reboot, and it was Izuku who managed to come back to himself enough to function. His face went bright red when he realized that he was still tucked against Yamada-sensei's chest, but his touch-starved ass made no move to pull away. Kid, you do realize your thumb was over the camera the entire time, right? Eraserhead asked. It just made Izuku flush more. You back with us, little listener? Yamada-sensei asked. Yeah. Thank you for bringing this to us, Eraser Izawa-sensei responded, picking up Izuku's knife. But we are going to have to take this. How did you get a knife past the metal detector, anyways? It's not made of metal, Izuku shrugged, still in the hug. It's ceramic. Izawa-sensei sighed. Well, I've got to take this. You can have it after school once you get off campus. Listener, are you okay? Yamada-sensei asked. I understand if you need to sit out the rest of class, that's quite a shock. Izuku shook his head, then a jolt of fear went through his spine, and he pulled back in panic. Where's Eri? Is she okay? Yamada-sensei put his hands on Izuku's shoulders as Izawa-sensei tapped on his COMM. Your sister is fine, he said gruffly. She's with 13. Izuku suddenly deflated, trusting the word of his teacher. You know, he said weakly, hating how his voice shook. I might take that break. I think I need a nap. He leaned on his homeroom teacher, letting the man guide him to the teacher's lounge. The adrenaline crash left him unaware of what was going on around him, and he was only vaguely aware of Yamada-sensei tucking him on the couch of the teacher's lounge and letting him drift off. Izuku woke up slowly, his head in someone's lap and someone playing with his hair. He could feel Eri bundled up next to him, curled up with her head underneath his. He groaned awake slowly, blinking as the events of the day sunk in. It was Yagi-sensei whose lap he was on. Hello, my boy, the man said kindly, with a shy smile. Izawa-san and Yamada-san told me you had an exciting day. Izuku groaned at the reminder. Hopefully I don't have homework, he grumbled. Well, it is the first week of school, Yagi-san muttered. It would be rather odd to be assigned homework now. He shrugged, sitting up and adjusting Eri on his chest. He could feel scratchiness at the back of his throat, and it came through in the raspiness in his voice. He shuffled over carefully. Can you take her real quick? I've got to go to the bathroom. Of course, young Midoriya. The hero took his sister, and she just settled in with a soft sigh, still fast asleep. We'll be here when you get back. Izuku nodded gratefully, hurrying to the nearest boys' bathroom. He was surprised to open the door to see Shinsu, washing his face at the sink. They just kind of stared at each other for a moment. Midoriya, Shinsu said, frowning in concern. Are you okay? You weren't in class dash. I'm dash. He barely managed to get that out before he could feel the wetness at the back of his throat. Holding his hand up, he rushed to the sink, quickly coughing up blood, using one hand to brace himself against the counter. Holy shit. Shinsu rushed over to him as Izuku sputtered. Do you need to go see recovery girl? He finished coughing up what felt like his lungs, grabbing a paper towel from the dispenser and wiping his face off, turning on the water to wash the blood down the sink. I'm fine, Izuku said, clumsily reaching into his blazer to find the hidden pocket sewn inside. You just coughed up a shit ton of blood, Shinsu said. That is not fine. Izuku finally pulled out the pill bottle, shaking one out and dry swallowing it, before tucking it back in its place. I'm fine, he insisted, turning back to Shinsu. This just happens sometimes if I don't take my meds. Your meds? Shinsu asked. For what? And where were you? Izuku shook his head. I was napping in the teacher's lounge. Apparently having a panic attack leads to me passing out and concerned teachers. You freaked us all the fuck out, Shinsu shook his head. You should go see recovery girl dash. No. She can't help. As long as I take my meds, I'll be fine. I just slept through it this time. And when are you supposed to take your meds? After lunch. Shinsu gaped. Is that why you always disappear after lunch? Izuku just leveled a deadpan look at him. Right, stupid question. Izuku just shook his head, standing up properly instead of leaning on the counter of the sink. You wanna come with me to pick up Eri? Sure. They walked to the teacher's lounge in silence. Izuku ended up carrying Eri home on his back, Shinsu carrying his bag all the way to the train station. Yagi saw them off, alongside Izawa, who gave Izuku his knife back, with the warning that he better not bring it back to school tomorrow. Izuku didn't notice the suspicious look that Izawa gave him, but Shinsu sure did. And he wondered what else his friend was hiding. Chapter 15, The USJ. Friendos 3, 10:29 p.m. God's Mistake, Kitsune, is online. God's Mistake, hey anyone from UA here. God's Mistake and Jessica Rabbit, Midnight, is online. Jessica Rabbit, Mike and Eraser are on date night, but I'm here. Jessica Rabbit, what's up kiddo? God's Mistake, this may have to interrupt date night. Jessica Rabbit, oh, proper punctuation. God's Mistake, I'm serious. Jessica Rabbit, I could tell. God's Mistake, there's going to be an attack on UA. At the USJ. To kill All Might. Jessica Rabbit, we knew that already, Foxy. Anything else? God's Mistake, there's going to be a villain that has a warp quirk and a villain that has a 5-point contact disintegration quirk. They're the leaders and they're very dangerous, despite whatever other low-level grunts show up. Please be careful. Jessica Rabbit, we will be, don't worry. Nedzu's already taking precautions. God's Mistake, good luck. Izuku sighed, dropping into his office through the vents. He called into the school to let them know he was taking a sick day, and he had just dropped off Eri at the Bakugos. Today was it, today was the day. He peeled off the bulky sweatshirt, sweatpants, and medical mask that he wore to the Bakugos to convince them he was truly sick and needed someone to watch Eri. He pulled on his vigilante gear, making sure his mask and bracers were working. Grappling hook on the underside. Working. Flamethrower on the top side. Working. Sure Yoni. Responsive. He strapped on no less than 22 knives, 13 smoke bombs, a small glass bottle of Kikin sweat, and the air pressure Glock that went with the tranq darts. His hand hovered over the 5 quirk suppressing bullets, before he shook his head and closed the safe up. If worst comes to worst, he could steal their quirks. No need to waste those. Finally geared up and ready, Kitsune slid open the window, closing it shut behind him and pulling up Crow. He lifted off, flying over Musudafo and towards UA. Shouta was having what was called a shit day. Because of some fuckery with the commission and finalized teaching schedules, Nedzu couldn't cancel the field trip or assign more teachers. Shouta and Kurana were each given a flare gun, but that was it, the assumption being that All Might should surely be able to take care of whatever's gonna happen. Only stupid criminals would try and pull something like this. But stupid criminals weren't enough to make his kid Kitsune worry, so something wasn't adding up. Of course, because today was the worst, All Might was out of time and remained back on campus. Despite the imminent security threat. Wonderful! Shouted tensed when the purple portal appeared, shifting into a fighting stance. 13. Protect the students. He could hear his students shouting behind him. Surprisingly, it was Bakuagu's voice who was the loudest behind him. You can't fight all of them alone. You're best suited to ambushes and shit. He turned slightly back, to reassure his students. No good hero is a one-trick pony. Then he turned back to the plaza, flinging himself into the fight. Kitsune landed outside of the USJ, deactivating Crow and landing on 2 feet. He didn't have time for subtlety, so he pulled up boost and used the electromagnetic strips on his solace to kick the metal door in. It went flying, thankfully missing all of the hero students and clipping Kurojiri on the metal armor. He mentally took note of the terrified students, not everyone from Class 1A, 13's condition, not great, and Kurojiri, insufferable. You kids better get out of here, Kitsune said, twirling 2 knives in each hand. It's about to get ugly. There was a bit of shouting, but Kitsune whipped the throwing knife in his left hand at Kurojiri. Predictably, he opened a portal in front of him, redirecting it towards him, but it gave Itza the window of time he needed to rocket past him and back towards the main campus. Kitsune, meanwhile, held up his hand, using attraction of small objects to rotate the knife so that the hilt hit his palm. Kurojiri disappeared, presumably to go to Shigaraki. Kitsune ran forward, sheathing the knives and pulling out a couple of smoke bombs. You kids take 13 and get out of here, Kitsune ordered, using his scared civilian voice that he perfected for this very purpose. Crack. Kitsune snapped his head back to the center, standing on top of the stairs gave him a clear view of the horror going on. Kurojiri was standing next to Shigaraki in front of the fountain. Eraserhead was face down in a crater, head being held down by a burly fist. And looming over him was the monster straight out of his nightmares, one of Sensei's pet projects. A Nomu. Fear pulsed through his veins, and unfortunately when he's afraid, he slips further into his persona. So without thinking he ran, chucking down a smoke bomb and racing forwards, finally feeling one for all charge up in his limbs. One for all, and something else. Smoke billowed out of the grenade as he hit the plaza. Time seemed to slow down around him as the Nomu lifted its fist one more time, and he desperately snapped his wrist forwards, like he was using his grappling hook, and something inside him burst like a dam. A black, shadowy tendril snapped out from his palm, tearing apart his glove, and wrapping around Eraserhead's waist. It snapped back towards him, but the tendrils kept wriggling, even as Kitsune used his other arm to gently lower Eraserhead to the ground. Someone, a voice he recognized somewhere but he didn't know what from, whispered in his ear, calm down. The smoke was still covering him, so Kitsune took a shaky left arm and pressed it to Eraserhead's neck, all while holding his right arm far away from him, the black tendril snapping around and tearing up the bricks. He sighed in relief as he felt a pulse. Eraserhead was going to live. His heart marginally slowed down, and he watched as the black tendrils receded back into his arm. That was something he could figure out later, but he stood up, the world coming back into focus as the smoke cleared out. NPC. Show yourself. Shigaraki shouted from the other side of the plaza. Steeling himself, Kitsune straightened up, striding confidently forwards as the smoke trailed around his ankles. So this is the League of Villains? He asked, stopping about 3 meters away from the villains. A man-child, a living butler, a giant zombie, and a bunch of D-list thugs. You. Shigaraki screeched. How dare you talk to us like that? You're just an NPC. Kitsune laughed, ugly and biting, and he could see Shigaraki flinch back. Still as pathetic as ever, Shiggy. No wonder the League is so disappointing. If all you have to replace me is the scraps of Sensei's experiments. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes. Mikumo. It's Kitsune, actually, Shiggy, unless you want me to start calling you Tenkun again. Kurojiri spoke up this time. Shigaraki Tamura, it is unwise to stay any longer, the heroes will be here soon. Shigaraki simply held up his hand. Nomu, kill the traitor. It was only years of honed instincts that allowed him to jump up, avoiding the Nomu's large fist. As time seemed to slow down around him, his brain kicked into high gear. He could feel 2 quirks in the Nomu's body, shock absorption and super regeneration, 2 standard enough quirks that he was unfortunately familiar with. Landing back on the ground, He pulled out a knife, but the action cost him, as the Nomu punched him directly in the chest, launching him across the plaza. He felt the crunch of his ribs, reasoned that they've got to be broken, before he hit the ground, felt another crunch, and knew that if they weren't broken yet, they definitely were now. The Nomu leaned over him, and Kitsune rolled out of the way, bracing himself to jump up. He landed on the Nomu's back, and could feel the thing try to shake him off. Thinking quickly, he used one hand to stab the thing's back, and used the other to press against its back, grabbing one of the lights in its skull. He was flung off, the knife coming out with a disgustingly slick noise. The quirk settled into his bones. Shock absorption. Not the one he wanted, but he'll take what he can get. Rolling back to his feet, he lunged forward, boost giving him momentum as he flung himself forward, climbing onto the Nomu's back. This time he managed to crawl onto its shoulders, raising the knife above his head and stabbing down. Something seemed to break, as the Nomu screamed, but Kitsune held on, using one for all in his legs to hang on alongside boost. Switching tactics, he pulled out the small glass bottle and shoved it into the stab wound, ignoring the feeling of brain matter against his fingers. Pulling off the lid, he aimed one arm straight down, activating the flamethrower. Okako stood nervously by the open door, alongside Todoroki and Kirishima. Itza still wasn't back with the heroes, and she could only dimly make out the sounds of conversation and fighting. The rest of their classmates had made it out, the only ones still inside the USJ are the villains, the Vigilante, and Aizawa-sensei. "I want to go back in," Okako admitted with a whisper, looking at the two nervously. "The Vigilante saved our lives. If he hadn't given Itza the opening to escape and kicked down the door, we'd all still be in there. Besides, Aizawa-sensei is still there." Surprisingly, at least to her, they both nodded. "It would be super unmanly for us to stay up here while they fight all alone." Kirishima whisper exclaimed. They crept in, at first, but they barely made it to the top of the stairs before a deafening explosion rung out, and they ducked down behind one of Todoroki's ice walls. When the world stopped ringing, she opened her eyes, and then wished she didn't. The ice on the other side of the wall was covered in blood, and there were even a few chunks of dark flesh around her. When she looked over the wall, she saw the carnage, blood, and chunks of flesh everywhere, coating the plaza. There was the misty villain from earlier, standing next to a man with a hand covering his face. Aizawa-sensei was laying at the base of the stairs, and the Vigilante, Kitsune, she thinks his name was laying on the ground a little ways away from the center of the explosion, although she saw him get to his feet. "Well, what now, Shigaraki?" the Vigilante taunted. "You lost. Game over." The man shrieked in a fit of rage, running towards Kitsune, who adopted a fighting stance. But he was too slow, and the man grabbed his neck. And Kitsune was judo flipping him, pinning him down with a knife pressed to the man's neck. The man looked over at their teacher, and so did Okako. "You really are so cool, Eraserhead." Aizawa-sensei had looked up, his eyes flashing bright red that signaled he had used his quirk. A portal suddenly appeared under them, and Kitsune kicked up, pushing the man into the portal and leaving it to close underneath him, dumping the man right back next to the misty villain's side. "Shigaraki Tamura," the misty villain spoke again. "We should leave now before the heroes get here. We've lost the Nomu, and Mikumo won't give up." "The Nomu did a number on him," the man growled, raising up one hand again. "I can kill him now." Kitsune got up shakily, holding up a bracer. "You're not immune to fire, Shigi," he said, a raspiness to his voice. They stood there for a few moments, then a shot fired off from behind them. Blood spurted out of the man Shigaraki's arm, and he stepped back. Okako looked up behind her, spotting Snipe and the other teachers. Okako kind of zoned out the gunshots, laser focused on watching as the Vigilante dropped onto his knees. The three hero students slid down the stairs on Todoroki's ice, and she saw that Yamada-sensei, her English teacher, was sliding down with them. Yamada-sensei went over to Aizawa-sensei, so the three hero course students went over to the Vigilante. "Are you okay?" she asked, dropping down to her knees next to him despite the blood getting on her costume. She saw Todoroki kneel down next to her, and Kirishima squat down next to him. The Vigilante tilted his head, the Kitsune mask betraying nothing, probably the point of the mask, and probably the origin of the name. "I'll be fine. Didn't I tell you kids to get out of here?" There was a massive explosion, Todoroki deadpanned. "You probably need medical attention." It's nothing, a little rest can't fix. Kitsune suddenly doubled over, adjusting his mask as he coughed up blood onto the ground. Fixing it back onto his face, he looked back up. That was blood. Kirishima shouted. You definitely need medical attention. Kirishima, can you carry him? Okako asked. He nodded, scooping the vigilante up into his arms with a hiss of pain. Sorry, dude, but we gotta get you up the stairs. He went over to Yamada-sensei, Okako, and Todoroki following along behind him. Yamada-sensei had Aizawa-sensei in his arms, and it looked pretty bad. The fact that the plaza was kind of covered in blood and chunks of flesh did not help. She should really stop thinking about that. Let's head on up, little listeners, he tried to smile reassuringly, but it came across pained instead. Hey, Mike, Kitsune waved a little from Kirishima's arms as they started up the stairs. Hello, Kitsune, Yamada-sensei responded, voice more subdued than their usually bubbly English teacher. You were the one who protected my students. Of course, the vigilante shot back. It's my job, after all. Prioritize the rescue. Thank you. It was silent, as they walked up. Okako kind of zoned out, and she could barely remember paramedics coming up to bundle away Aizawa-sensei and Kitsune. She was checked out, mentally, and only came back to herself hours later, when she was sitting in front of the detective. She wondered how the heroes who saved her were doing. Kitsune was pulled out of Kirishima's arms, yes, they were as good for hugging as he speculated, and onto a stretcher by a paramedic. He sat up, pushing past the hands and the pain that threatened to pin him to the stretcher. Hey, listener, we're just trying to help, Present Mike said, moving towards him. He could see Midnight and Nezu coming up behind him. You were coughing up blood. Kitsune was about to protest, but Nezu held up a paw. Before you say anything, I would like to say that because you saved the lives of our students and our faculty, we are willing to turn the other cheek, so to speak. We will leave your identity a secret, and we will let you go once the hospital clears you for release. He went quiet, letting the words process in his ear. Whatever villain was jamming the signal between the USJ and the rest of the world must have been defeated or knocked out, because Shiryoni was turning back on again. He didn't know anyone in the underground who could help him with broken ribs and a punctured lung that wouldn't stab him in the back. This really was his only option if he didn't want to die. Fine, but I have a few conditions, Kitsune said. 1. No anesthesia or painkillers. I don't want them to mess with my quirk. 2. The mask stays on, as well as every piece of gear that isn't necessary to take off. 3. Any gear you do remove I get back. That is acceptable, Nezu said, and the other two teachers also nodded, both of them with anxious looks on their faces. I will inform the paramedics. As Kitsune finally accepted, laying down on his back, he raised a hand to his mask. Entering hospital mode. Chapter 16, Fallout. Izuku opened his eyes, blinking a couple of times for his surroundings to set in. Everything was dark, except for a patch of brick tiles on the ground, on which sit 7 chairs in a semicircle, all facing the center. On these thrones were wispy ghosts, of which a few are familiar to him. Floating around him were glowing wisps, orbiting him, some slowly and others very quickly. Among these wisps were a wispy crow, flying around him with a few caws. A pitch-black snake rested on his shoulders, twirled around his neck with unsettling red eyes that reminded him of All for One, the villain. What the fuck, Izuku said, because really, what the fuck? One of the ghosts snorted. So eloquent, kid, he said, and Izuku had to do a double take, as the ghost was a near spitting image of Kaken, only with a sexy scar over his face. Give Nine a break, another ghost said, and if Izuku squinted, he could have sworn she looked familiar. I mean, that was my response when I first got here. The ghost with straight white hair sighed. Maybe we should introduce ourselves, he said. I'm Shigaraki Yoichi, but you can call me One. The ghost that heckled him earlier just huffed, leaning back in his throne chair thing. Amoyari Diako. Just call me Two. Next to him, the ghost with the bandana and ponytail spoke up. I'm Chujitsu Tateru. The others call me Three. The ghost with cracks on his face went next. It's Shinomori Hikage. I'm 4. The next ghost had goggles on his forehead and no shirt. My name is Banjo Daigora, and I'm the pro hero Lariat. But everyone calls me 5, if you couldn't tell from the order. The ghost next to him sighed, hunched over with his jacket collar covering his mouth. Shizuke Kureta, I was the pro hero and I'm 6. Well, I'm 7. The ghost, who looked vaguely familiar, said. But you might know me better as Shimura Nana, or by my hero name, Nana Nyan. And you definitely recognize this fellow. She pointed behind her, and sure enough, if Izuku squinted he could see the faintest wispy outline of Yagi behind the chair. Well, I'm Midoriya Izuku. Izuku felt extremely awkward speaking, but he supposed that the ghosts had introduced themselves to him, so he should introduce himself. I don't have a hero name yet. And I guess you could call me 9? You already are. So, I bet you're wondering where you are right now. Nana leaned forwards. Izuku simply nodded. That was the million-yen question. Welcome to your subconscious. What? Izuku sputtered, then took another look around him. The wisps orbiting him looked like the lights of quirk that All for One lets him see, and he could tell that the wispy crow was the quirk crow and the snake around his neck was the quirk All for One. Don't ask him how, he couldn't tell you. Oh. So then how did I get here? Because no offense, you're all dead, and I'm not. We don't really know, Four said. It might be because something happened with One for All. What? Oh. It clicked, the memories of the past day. The black tentacles. Yeah, that was my quirk, Black Whip. 5 piped up, thumping his chest. It seems that in the stress of battle, in the face of losing a loved one, you triggered it, One said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. It opens up the interesting possibility of you also being able to wield everyone else's quirks too. But why him, as opposed to anyone else? 3 asked. Isn't it obvious? Nana asked, gesturing to Izuku. Everyone quieted down at that. You have All for One, don't you? One stated more than asked. Izuku nodded, ignoring the hissing of the snake. I was born with it. I am related to the villain All for One. That's why One for All was reacting so strangely, 6 spoke up. And why your quirk is also acting strange. And why your body is being slowly ripped apart, 4 pointed out. Izuku huffed, then grinned, more confident than he felt. Don't worry about that. I've got that handled. The edges of his vision started to blur. Well, it seems like our time is nearing its end, One said. It's time for you to return to the waking world. He could only barely see the ghosts wave goodbye to him as his vision went dark. Iyashi Nito has been a hero doctor for many, many years, but this is the first time the situation was so weird. One of their patients was a vigilante. Not just any vigilante, but Kitsune, the vigilante who was slowly becoming viral. And everything about him was so goddamn weird. Someone cleared their throat, and Nito pulled herself out of her head. Present Mike was standing in front of her, looking a little sheepish. Right, they had placed Kitsune in the same ward as Eraserhead. Hello, I'm Dr. Iyashi Nito, she said. I'm the doctor treating both Kitsune and Eraserhead. Or in charge of their healing. How bad is it? Present Mike asked. Upon a closer look, he wasn't sheepish, but nervous. Probably afraid. Well, they'll both pull through, she said. Eraserhead suffered from multiple broken ribs, and both his legs and arms were broken. In addition, his orbital floor suffered some damage, and we are unsure how that will affect his quirk. The skin on his elbow disintegrated partially, but the muscles remained undamaged, and will just leave a scar. Present Mike sighed in relief. And the kid? Ah yes, the headache. To be honest, we don't know. His injuries will heal, that's for certain. He had a punctured lung and was suffering from heavy blood loss, but surgery and blood transfusions have helped alleviate those issues. He has multiple broken ribs, but those will also heal with time and recovery. No, what's concerning is what happened during surgery and during our tests. What happened? The doctor sighed. The quirk of one of our nurses is called assess. She can determine the physical condition of a patient with a touch. According to her, Kitsune's body is constantly tearing itself apart, and it was only abated when we put heavy quirk-suppressing cuffs on his wrists. In addition, every time we send test results to our computers for analysis, it comes up blank. And his medical profile is being remotely tampered with. Almost as if someone is purposely erasing his test results and clearing his medical file, Present Mike muttered. I'll bring this up with the detective. Thank you. She nodded in response. Recovery girl will be here soon, you can go see them now, Nito said, giving the hero a small bow and moving out of the way of the door. As she watched him enter, she thought they looked like a family, especially since they were able to confirm that Kitsune was 15. She shook her head and straightened up, getting back to work. She had a paper file to write up. Friendos 3, 12:39 p.m. Fuss Row. Present Mike, Tsuki-kun, Detective Tsukachi, and Jessica Rabbit, midnight, are online. Jessica Rabbit, how bad is it? Fuss Row. Pretty bad, NGL. Fuss Row. Xiao's gonna be in bandages for a pretty long time. Fuss Row. And God the kid. Fuss Row. Tsuki-kun, Jessica Rabbit, and McChicken, Hawks, are online. McChicken, I just heard the news, is everyone okay? Tsuki-kun, 13, Eraser and Kitsune got severely injured. Tsuki-kun, the students all had minor scrapes and bruises. McChicken, severely injured? Jessica Rabbit, what about Kitsune? Fuss Row. His injuries will heal. Fuss Row. But apparently his body keeps tearing itself apart and they don't know why. Jessica Rabbit, what? McChicken, what? Fuss Row. And some hacker keeps meddling with she medical files. Tsuki-kun, I'll look into it. Fuss Row. Xiao's looking to recover enough to be discharged in a few days. WRG's help. Fuss Row. He'll be back to norm a few days after the sports festival. Fuss Row. Under normal circumstances WRG's help should just be a week. Fuss Row. But they just don't know. Jessica Rabbit, poor kid. McChicken, do you think he'll let us help him? Tsuki-kun, I just don't know. Kitsune wakes up at 7 in the evening, and his first words when he was awake was what the fuck. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.